conhecimento é ilimitado. Neste país tão grandioso, existe uma população cheia de sonhos e projetos. E para oferecer à população uma vida repleta de possibilidades, os desafios são inúmeros. Desafios que o setor público transforma em oportunidades, junto com um grande aliado, o Banco do Brasil. Além de termos vasta experiência no atendimento ao setor público e um histórico de mais de 200 anos de parceria com o governo federal, estamos presentes em toda a cadeia produtiva brasileira e em todo o território nacional, inclusive com representatividade internacional. Apoiamos o setor público no desenvolvimento do país para a melhoria da qualidade de vida da população. Por meio de nossa rede de escritório setor público, oferecemos consultoria para atender as principais iniciativas do governo federal. Assim, contribuímos com o gerenciamento de recursos e implementação de políticas públicas em diversas áreas. Auxiliamos na administração de bens e serviços públicos por meio de ferramentas de gestão de recursos e programas governamentais, sempre buscando estimular a inovação. E ainda facilitamos o dia a dia dos servidores públicos e os apoiamos em suas necessidades. Desenvolvemos soluções que estimulam a melhoria da infraestrutura, produtividade e mobilidade. Contribuímos com o setor público para a promoção do desenvolvimento do país, visando a inclusão social e o crescimento sustentável. Apoiamos o setor público para investir em áreas como educação e saúde, fundamentais para a nossa sociedade ter acesso à informação e bem-estar. Estimulamos o dinamismo da economia por meio da geração de trabalho e renda, dos serviços aos cidadãos, do apoio à agricultura e ao empreendedorismo e o crescimento das empresas. Porque para o Brasil que você imagina, pode contar sempre com a gente. Banco do Brasil. A gente tem tudo, para tudo que o Brasil imaginar.
Nas últimas 4 décadas. Durante esse processo, os governos locais e regionais aumentaram em número, fortaleceram sua autonomia política e assumiram novas atribuições. Atualmente, mais de 18 mil governos locais e regionais na América Latina e no Caribe desempenham funções essenciais e diversas em setores como educação, saúde, segurança pública e provisão de infraestrutura viária e de água e saneamento. O ordenamento territorial dos países é heterogêneo e guarda uma estreita relação com sua extensão territorial. 13 países, incluindo todos os da América do Sul, têm 2 níveis de governo subnacional. Outros 16 têm apenas um nível. Esses governos estão em um processo contínuo de aprendizado e desenvolvimento. Apesar de sua importância, há pouco conhecimento acumulado sobre seu funcionamento, seus recursos e práticas. Como diminuir as grandes lacunas de desenvolvimento que existem entre regiões de cada país, que se manifestam em diferenças de renda, de acesso a serviços e outras medidas de bem-estar? De que maneira é possível melhorar a vida nas cidades por meio de uma melhor gestão urbana, especialmente em uma região tão urbanizada como a América Latina e Caribe? Como enfrentar, a partir do território, os desafios trazidos pelos fenômenos globais da mudança climática e da digitalização? O CAF apresenta seu relatório de Economia e Desenvolvimento, Soluções Próximas. O papel dos governos locais e regionais na América Latina e no Caribe. Um relatório que apresenta 2 grandes objetivos: documentar em detalhe as ações e problemáticas das administrações locais e regionais e delinear uma agenda para o fortalecimento de suas capacidades de governo. O ED propõe 5 áreas de ação para que os governos locais e regionais alcancem esses objetivos: fortalecer a institucionalidade fiscal, desenvolver capacidades de planejamento urbano, construir burocracias efetivas e representativas de seus territórios, melhorar os mecanismos de cooperação interjurisdicional e acelerar a digitalização e a implantação de tecnologia. Para tornar isso possível, é necessário trabalhar de maneira coordenada entre os diferentes níveis de governo, incluindo as administrações nacionais, que tem um papel protagonista no desenho da descentralização, nas regras fiscais e na definição de padrões e processos administrativos. Com este relatório, o CAF reafirma seu compromisso cada vez mais forte com o desenvolvimento e modernização dos governos locais e regionais, por meio do financiamento de projetos de investimento, cooperações técnicas, fomento à associatividade, com iniciativas como a Rede de Biodiversidades, oferta de capacitação dirigida a funcionários e produtos de conhecimento, como este documento, Relatório de Economia e Desenvolvimento, Soluções Próximas. O papel dos governos locais e regionais na América Latina e no Caribe. CAF, Banco de Desenvolvimento da América Latina e Caribe.
Muito bom dia, sou Tatiana.
Good morning, I'm Tatiana Carvalho, and on behalf of CAF, the Bank of Development of Latin America and Caribbean, I'd like to welcome everyone here in the auditorium of the Bank of Brazil headquarters. It's really good to follow you here in the launch of the Report of Economy and Development of 2025 of CAF. Close solutions for the governments in local and Latin America and Caribbean. Today we have very famous speakers that are going to talk about the reputation of the subnational governments. There is also an agenda that is going to talk about the capacities trying to reduce the inequalities between regions and the urban areas. This event is being broadcast in English, Spanish, and Portuguese through our website, cafe.com, and our channel on YouTube. We invite you to share your opinions on social media using the hashtag #HageCAF and following our account at CAF on Twitter and Instagram as well. We're going to start this event inviting Mr. José Ricardo Saceron, Vice President of Business, Government, and Corporate Sustainability of Bank of Brazil, to say his initial words. Good morning, everyone here. I'd like to greet the president of CAF, Sérgio, the vice president here in Brazil, Antonio Silveira, and also to greet everyone represented here, all the authorities, representatives of government and ministries and institutions. And to say that it is a joy to welcome you here at Bank of Brazil. This is the headquarters of the bank. Around this, we have around 6,000 employees working here, and 81,000 employees working throughout the country. 95% of the municipalities of Brazil have our service, and the Vice Presidency of Government and Sustainability is my position here. And Bank of Brazil is partly owned by the federal government. It is the bank that has partnerships with state governments and local governments and town halls as well. We provide services for these areas, for the subnational entities, and the report that is going to be presented here is related to the activity that we do here in Bank of Brazil, as we provide credit and many different solutions for the municipalities. In the past 2 years, our operations were totaled almost 40 billion reais in helping the development and meeting the demands of the population. And the town halls are the ones, and the governments, the state governments and the federal governments are the ones that meet the demands of the population, but they have a very important partnership with us. Congratulations to CAF for this launch of this report that is going to help us in drafting these public policies and also dealing with these issues in the municipalities and the state governments. Sustainability is another pillar here, very important. We have invested a lot in it, and 1/3 of our credit operations that reach 370 billion reais are connected to ESG in terms of credit operations, not just with renewable energy, but low carbon agriculture, direct planting or crops. And as most people know, Banco Brazil is the main agent of credit for livestock and agriculture in the country. So for us, it is really important to have in Brazil an agricultural practice and livestock practices that are sustainable. It's with these credit operations that we encourage this sustainable aspect. And we'd like to share experiences with other governments and other banks and other institutions also that will cooperate with our work in achieving our goal of turning the world a much more sustainable place. Our activity is very relevant in the Amazon region. The countries in South America have a very strong presence in that region. Part of their territory is located in this region, and we have pretty interesting experiences of bioeconomy, other types of lines of credit to try and make the people stay and not to leave these areas, especially to support economic activities that will preserve the environment and the forest. At the same time that it brings a source of income for these families in a way in order to preserve our main wealth, which are our natural resources, both of Brazil and Colombia as well, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela, countries that part of their territory is located within the Amazon region. I talked about the bank, but I would like to say that you're welcome here. It's an honor to have you here. Count on us to support your activities on the bank. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Saceron. Continuing now, we ask to the stage for the initial remarks Mr. Sérgio Anisis Granados, the president of CAP. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to greet Mr. Saceron. Thank you so much for your initial remarks and for making it easy for us to hold this presentation here of the report in Bank of Brazil. And since it's the first time that we are here in Brasilia, you should enjoy the beauty of the city. It is a dream come true. I'd like to greet Mr. Redondo, the Federation of Latin American Cities and Municipalities, FLAGMA, Ms. Paisano, the governor of Choco. And the Choco is the region that is the most preserved around Colombia and near the Pacific. We're trying to set up a fund that will help the basin of the tropical Pacific also, especially the capital of Chocoa. And I'd like to greet Gabriela Pequeno Costa, the Vice Mayor of Fortaleza. Thank you for your presence here. It's a municipality that is very important and relevant. We have worked for many years in this town hall, and our manager of the territorial development, and he's been for 15 years in Fortaleza. His first work in CAF was assessing a project in Fortaleza, which is almost like a cycle. I'd like to greet also Eliana Becking, the Secretary of International Relations in charge of the Ministry of Planning of here in Brazil. The CAF team here, Cristina Vencinelli, Antonio Silveira, Vice President of the Private Sector, Leonardo Frisancho, the Manager of the Transport Area, Stefano Torisa, representative of CAF in Brazil, other representatives from Honduras, Fernando Zafasi, the director of our Center in International Relations and in the government, and a very special salute to the diplomats and also the ambassadors that are present here, the workers of CAF, the panelists, the people that are watching this event, because the report of economy and development is an investment that has happened for over 20 years in order to discuss the most relevant topics in Latin America. The knowledge is made by Latin American and Caribbean for Latin American and Caribbean. It's important to consider this, and it goes beyond that. It's not just it analyzing, but it makes recommendations for specific entities. And this year is celebrated the 20th anniversary of the report of economy and development in Chile. We made a presentation that was connected to this 20th anniversary that always has to do with the well-being of Latin American people and in people in Latin America and Caribbean. This is a very special report that focuses on institutions or government levels that are accessible. Why do we present this document here in Brasilia? First question. First, because we're here. And second, it has to do with the Latin American capacity, especially here from Brazil, to build dreams. Brasilia, as Niemeyer defined it, was thought of to be not just a city, was more of a dream. We have also this modern architecture, and there is also the involvement of the policy of Juscelino Kubitschek. This city breathes possibilities. It is a proof or the evidence that you can turn a space that is open into urban development. Brasilia is a unique city in Latin America and the Caribbean, and that's why we wanted to present the report here. Second, we wanted to think about this point, especially because of Brazil, because of the local regime and local governments, also the amount of local governments that are present here. But this is a very important place and country with local governments spread throughout the country. And each one of these governments, considering all of its challenges, they are trying to do going through the digital transition, the environmental transition, using innovative solutions to get closer to the citizens. And this report, in the case of Latin America and Caribbean, it is replicated at this level. But Brazil is not just it's the partner of CAF since 2019, and for almost 20 years. This is a bank that was consolidated, the CAF, and we have this. We are proud of this. We recognize that the portfolio of CAF is great. It's focused on town halls, state governments, with almost $4 billion. It's work that we have been doing little by little, especially when it comes to helping public services, resilience, and digital transition. And why a report on local governments? The reason for that is that when we think about Latin America, we think about 33 countries in the continent, and there are islands. But truly, the makeup of Latin America, when we look at it, we're talking about actually 18,000 governments that are part of it, considering municipal governments, parishes, and the local governments, state governments, all levels of governments that we have in the region, metropolitan region as well. Thank you. Two-thirds of the Latin American population live, which are 20% of the municipal governments. This is a region that is highly concentrated on cities. Most of the solutions that we have to provide our citizens come from this level of government. Either water, sanitation, education, air quality, resilience, or climate change resilience. Also, it depends on this level of government. The report shows the importance of the decentralization and the autonomy that is a very present debate in the past 40 years, 4 decades. This report highlights that part of the expansion and the growth of this universe that keeps being expanded of municipalities and provinces, of the states and regions, has coincided with the demographic growth in Latin America in the 80s. And I also would add that this is the longest period of democracy that Latin America has experienced, and that has enabled political autonomy in the local governments. In the past 40 years, we have seen how almost all the countries of Latin America have performed the elections of town councilors or mayors and governors, and it's without a doubt a very relevant expansion to the closest level of government. That's why we have this year the task to identify the challenges that are surrounding the local governments. Nowadays, we almost have 560 million people living in urban areas, which represents 82% of the population. And in 2050, this percentage is going to get closer to 80%. That is 680 million people. So Latin America is going to face a real challenge, not just to work with the local governments and to provide solutions for these governments to meet the demands of their citizens. The report highlights, and I don't want to jump the gun here, but basically highlights three main areas or challenges. One, which is really complex, the geographic asymmetry. Within the same country, there are different levels of convergence in this territory. There is a gap within each one of the places, the countries, in different sizes. And also the second part, the challenge is to improve the planning and the provision of public and urban services. And with the improvement in accessibility of residences and the costs also. And the third area, which is to build capacities to manage from the territory these global challenges such as digitalization, but I would also say resilience regarding climate challenge. These are the challenges that RED has to face. But at the same time, there are 5 strategic areas in order to strengthen this document. The first one is to strengthen the fiscal capacity of the entities of the strategic importance, the important strategic actions. Latin America, we have a situation which is, for example, the registration, and then we have the opportunity to improve the quality. And after that, we're going to see also during the presentation. But at the same time, and the audio, the quality of IP, and we can work to strengthen the fiscal areas as well, or as we used to say before, the capacity of urban planning also. It's important to improve these strategic actions, the urban planning characteristics. We have to think about transit, and not just this, but also, and considering that 2 years ago, we presented a report of inequality in Latin America to close down these gaps in inequality. The third strategic action is the importance of attracting and retaining people that are qualified at a local level. And this way we can perform a better bureaucracy.
Ahora se escucha mejor, creo yo. Y por cuarto, mejora.
Vai dar para escutar melhor. So, in all different jurisdictional areas, especially metropolitan areas, now they have the growth of the urban population. This has required a larger level of coordination because a lot of the urban expansion in Latin America goes beyond the limits of municipalities, the original municipalities of the cities. And finally, as a fifth element or axiom of this document is accelerating the digitalization and the use of technology at the local level. So we're going to go into details a little bit later and indicate where the recommendations are going. Allow me to finish with a reflection on CAF. The bank was born in 1968 only with 6 Andean countries, and now it's an institution with 23 and going to 24 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Brazil is one of the first to join the bank, a non-Andean country to join the bank. And so up until today, over the last 30 years, we've been growing in terms of geographic coverage, but also in terms of its portfolio and programs and projects and different local projects. So we also have, we want to expand our portfolio directed towards municipal. So this is going to be on $5 billion. So it's a large portfolio that's growing. And we, our directorate, approved an increment to the portfolio. And a part of this growth should be given to local governments so that we work closer with the local governments with sovereign guarantees. And so we need to be converted for a bank, not just for Brazil, but for Latin America as a whole. A bank with local financing. We're converted to a bank for local governments. And I'd like to insist that in the case of Brazil, we have exceptional cases. I visited a lot of them, different projects in Niterói, for instance, in Salvador as well, Porto Alegre. A lot to do with urban development. Bank is present with its local growth, as well as in Brazil as a whole. Over the last 2 years, we've also established a network of cities that work for diversity and the expansion of our cities, oftentimes applied to natural resources or to stop with the indiscriminate use of natural resources. So we launched this network in Barranquilla, Colombia, 4 years ago, and there already are over 220 municipalities and local governments in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we can recover our natural capital from the cities. And so we believe that we can respond to this. It's possible to revert the situation in our cities, to give environmental services to our citizens, recovering the natural assets that we have. And it's a movement that I think that Latin America needs to bet in, because that's one of our main greeting cards to the world, our natural resources, and that we have the capacity to solve our energy and food problems, but also as far as the quality of our natural capital. We're exactly in this moment of reestablishing this commitment as an institution and looking at the future in this sense. We have other challenges, and we need to face a reality that's centralized in Latin America, which is geographic change. Latin America between the 1950s and 60s up until the 70s had a very important growth in its demographics, 115%. And in the period between 1980 and 2010, this lowered to 63%, the demographic growth in Latin America. Over the next few years, we projected a growth of less than 10%. This is the reality that Latin America is going through. We have less children, and we have a lot of unemployed youth, and many adults and the elderly. All local governments need to look at this over the next 20 to 30 years. Cities that will have less babies, cities that will have youth looking for jobs, trying to study, and older adults and the elderly that need to use the social security and health services. And this is both an important area for local and national levels. So this also feeds the dynamics which can also lead to insecurity, a lack of public security. They can, since if we have unemployed youth, this can lead to youth that don't study or work and get to are affected by criminal gangs. And this is top of mind as far as issues for Latin America and the Caribbean. So this is an issue that we need to understand, and that will be very important for us until 2055. It's not the same being a mayor, governor, or at this point. We need to have different solutions. We're going to be living in different realities, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we believe that's important for us to have instruments that are dynamic, updated in time. They must also serve for comparisons in terms of success, and also regarding our problems in Latin America, and also to help mayors and governors who need to, on the day-to-day, deal with the problems with the very quick solutions to respond to the citizens' needs. We want to get closer to them and have solutions for mayors and local government officials. With this report, we also want to reiterate our commitment to our determinations with our commitment to local governments. This is a message that Brasilia has as well. And Kubitschek in 1960 said that Brazil would sow Brazil from the inside. It would make Brazil whole from the inside. So the responsibility of the 18,000 local governments in Latin America, they want to stitch together the country. And that's what we want to make sure happens. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Diaz Granados. Before we get to the main content, please allow me to remind you that you can share your opinion on social network with the Rede Coffee social tag. And you can also share it with our Instagram and Facebook or Twitter accounts. And now to the report on the role of local governments and regional governments in Latin America and the Caribbean, introduced by Lady Veronica Frizancho, Knowledge Manager at Coffee. Please come to the stage. Good morning, everyone. My Portuguese is non-existent, so we'll start in Spanish. Thank you for all the authorities who are here for the launch, our special guests, all the journalists who are here with us. I especially like to thank the coffee offices here in Brazil, Banco do Brasil, for receiving us at their home, all of our assistants, and obviously all our colleagues in coffee. The Red Development and Economy Report is a report that we've had for 20 years. In 2024, it was a 20-year anniversary. It's a report that is converted into an important product for the institution as a whole. And it's a technical arm that accompanies all operations of the bank, and throughout the years we've been solidifying this connection between the different areas. In this report, it's a celebratory report, an anniversary report. We're looking at the region over the last 20 years and what are the main advancements, significant advances in themes such as the reduction of poverty, access to education and health. But above all, there are still some important challenges persisting in terms of inequality, climate problems, climate themes, environmental protection, and others, which are presented as the new challenges in the region, including in areas in which we've had some national level progress. We do see that there are disparities, alarming disparities, inside the same territory in relation to the different local and regional governments. So both in urban and rural areas. In particular, this report is inspired in dealing with finding nearby solutions which might allow us to close these territorial gaps in an inclusive manner inside each country. So what we find is that in some of the goals, for instance, the SDG 6, there are notable advancements. For instance, in Brazil, there's an almost 84% of homes in the country have quality water supply. This percentage is 68% for basic sanitation. So if we look at the territorial inequalities, the numbers don't give us such a great report as they seem. There are still 14% of municipalities in Brazil in which less than half of homes have access to quality water, and 60% of municipalities in which less than half of homes have access to sanitation services. So these are the challenges that local and regional governments in the region need to face. And obviously, we need to find ways to support them, not only in the technical and financing side of things, but also in the institutional side of things, because this task requires joining efforts from distinct fronts. In terms of social development goals, they also coincide with economic development. It's notorious that in the region we have these very productive urban clusters with a lot of production of wealth in the cities, and we have faraway zones, remote rural zones with little productivity and low production of wealth, including when we have critical mineral resources which are now exploited in the energy transition or sources of energy wealth in rural areas. These extractive activities, in some cases, lead to a local development which allows for the growth of these territories in a more equitative manner. Another recurring theme is, as far as the economic development and economic income development, is the government capacities, both the national and local and regional levels. Oftentimes they convert into a bottleneck for a lot of the public policies when implementing them. So these public policies need to be looked at for the results, not their intentions. In this book, what we try to do is to approach these restrictions or limits in terms of the capacities in distinct environments and management and the fiscal area that different local and regional governments have. And so we generate a few policy recommendations that might allow these different regions to advance and to strengthen the role that these governments have. So as a development bank, obviously this theme is central to us, not only from a financing point of view. We know that the regional governments are strengthening since 2022 that we've been, as we listened to in the opening, but this report should also be converted into a technical side of things, a technical monitoring for the different bank efforts and CAF efforts in these territories. So we have a double contribution. On the one hand, it's a diagnosis that we have and the different contexts that we have. It's oftentimes a very limited sources of information on the characteristics and performance and the needs and attributes of these local and regional governments in our work. Once we have this diagnosis, then we make a roadmap, which has recommendations for specific policies, taking an example best practices identified throughout the territories of Latin America and the Caribbean. In this sense, CAF has constituted itself as a great ally because we can offer this regional perspective and process it, and to be able to create policy recommendations that can serve countries in the region which might be going through different processes. This roadmap is more necessary than ever in a moment in which the capacities of regional governments are changing, the different degrees of autonomy that they have in different countries. So it's an opportunity to strengthen this autonomy. Let's advance in a parallel path of strengthening the local and regional capacities. Finally, I think it's important to highlight who are the creators of this agenda. I said that CAF is a development bank, a multilateral institution that can support with financing and with the technical side, a technical arm, and this report is a good example of that. But also in fostering associations, like as we said, this is extremely important in the context of some government which are smaller due to the demographic transition in terms of its population. Finally, other than the local and regional governments, we have the central governments, the national governments, which need to create the necessary environment and the institutionality and mechanism so that these local governments have the capacity that they need to continue doing their work and fulfilling the political wills and executing the needed policies. Finally, the private sector must also be present because a lot of the opportunities for investment are also presented in conjunction with challenges and capacities in the territories. So I believe it's important to visualize the stakeholders throughout the presentation that we'll be talking about, presentation we'll be making. So we're very enthusiastic because this opens a moment for us to start our dialogue. So we have responses throughout the region, and this is just a way for us to start a dialogue through the multiple presentations and panels that we'll have. We can continue generating recommendations for each country and each reality that we find throughout the region. Thank you very much. I hope that you have a great time during the presentation. Thank you very much, Veronica Frisancho. And I'd like to invite to the stage for the presentation of Guillermo Alves and Gustavo Hajado, the main economists for the Social Economic Research Department at CAF. Hello, good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure for us to be here presenting this new development and economy report, Nearby Solutions, the role of local and regional governments in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is work that we did with Gustavo Fajardo, authored with a series of authors inside the Knowledge Department, and with Kanatala, who is here with us. Let me begin telling you about why we made this instrument, because this is a graph that we have here in Brazil. It has to do with Latin American population and the distances from the different governmental differences. So 14% of Latin American Caribbeans live close 50 kilometers to the capital. 50% are over 500 kilometers away. So in this context, it's necessary for local governments and regional governments are there so that we can have educational, health solutions, urban transportation, giving all these solutions to the citizens. It's necessary for countries to have government structures that are decentralized. As the president has already said, Latin America and the Caribbean is going through this path of having more governments that are more autonomous at the regional and local level, and we had a larger number with more functions as well. Here we have the amount of governments that were created over the past 4 decades, and as the president has already mentioned, in the 80s and 90s, it was a time of great geographic growth. It was necessary for us to develop new jurisdictions in places where there were barely any population before. So new municipalities, new cities, and certainly Brazil is a good place to tell the story, because that's exactly what happened with the creation of hundreds of municipalities. In this new cycle that we're in, the dynamic has been consolidated with less creation of municipalities, but there are still year to year municipalities being created. As the result of this result, then in 2025, what happens is that a good amount of government services, which are for development, are actually under the responsibility of these regional and local governments. And so they have a critical role in this development. We know relatively little about them in terms of the knowledge we have about them. The data is relatively fragmented, but we do know there are many areas for opportunities for improvement in government, for institutionality and decentralization.
This knowledge that is sometimes really fragmented, it has encouraged us to write this report of economy and development. And today we'd like to introduce it, to present it in 3 big sections. First, what are these governments? What are they? Some of their attributions, to present some of the stakeholders of the story. In second place, to know nowadays what are the main challenges that all of the governments face. And third area, to know the opportunities to strengthen the institutional organizations at the level of subnational governments. So we're going to start with, firstly, these places, these governments that are closer to the territory, that are smaller. Here we have a map that is pretty dense and shows the capillarity of the local governments, 18,173. In February 2025, when we stopped the counting, that has Latin America and Caribbean, with the exceptions of some known municipality territories in Argentina, in Colombia, in some areas of Uruguay. In all of the 29 countries of the 33 of LAC, we have local governments. At another level of the subnational governments that we have in LAC is the regional governments called intermediate governments that are between the national and the local governments. Here you can see in the map the regional governments, and they are only 13 governments have these, or 13 countries have this level of government, which are the bigger ones. Here we have a cross-cutting dimension, which is the heterogeneity and the structure of the centrality, and it's really related to the size, and it's clear, very clear here in Brazil. Brazil is the most highly populated country in the region, that has the largest amount of regional governments, and that has the most decentralization. After showing some of the stakeholders, we are now going to see at fundamental contributions that these governments make for the development. We have a lot of attributions that these governments do, with a lot of details, and we know that it would be really hard to describe it in detail. And now we want to show you 2 axes or 2 facts that are important to know why it's so important to the contribution of these governments. Firstly, we're going to focus in the yellow part, and which are the tasks of the local governments. And we know that all of these countries have these tasks that are very close to ours as citizens: the collection of residues, local licenses for economic activities, like infrastructure of parks and avenues. These structures are very important for all of us and for the citizens, and it's a basic core, which is this fundamental core of the national, subnational governments to well-being. In small countries, there are not these local governments, these subnational governments, especially in countries where the regional governments exist. They're sometimes small and medium sized, such as Paraguay, Chile, and Uruguay. The local governments do not take on more attributions that are here in the red color. And it seems very similar to the ones in this chart. Since the governments and they have the other attributions, and that's something that I'd like to tell you also in the attributions of these governments, is that these are tasks that are more complex, associated to what the state of well-being is, teaching, health, water and sanitation, public security. These are the sectors that we have analyzed in further details in the report. And in teaching and health, it's very common to have a pattern so that the local governments, especially in small scale, in schools and education, and also in health, they involve in these hospitals and the secondary institutions of teaching, or tertiary or higher education institutions. Another sector that we have to remember is the citizen participation. It is common for the big countries to the regional governments to be in charge of the police forces of the country. And in the report, we also show a growing trend of the local governments to develop their own policy or police organizations that are closer to local governments, that benefit from this proximity to secure their territories. Another sector, such as sanitation, public transport, we see in the chapter 6 of the report, and in further detail. After the presentation of the stakeholders and their fundamental role, we are going to talk about the three main challenges that have already been mentioned by the President. Firstly, it's the challenge that is very common in any study of decentralization, that is inherent to decentralization. It's the tension between to grant autonomy, but at the same time to try and bridge the gaps between the territories and areas in such an unequal situation or region such as Latin America. Here we have access to drinking water, especially Brazil has a very good performance here, but there are gaps. And these gaps are a challenge for the local and regional governments, because they have a lot of attributions that have to do with it. Training of human capital, sanitation, but pretty often the governments that face these deficits and are the ones that have the fewest resources. And this is present in all of the areas. Going back to the map, here we put it in the computer to present a tool that we launched also with the report, which is the Regional and Local Government Atlas of CAF. In Brazil, there is a lot of institutional data, but without that, in other countries of Latin America, you don't have so many databases that are connected to the municipal numbers, and there is not a single repository that can enable us to analyze the bridges between these countries, these gaps between these countries. That's why we got the help of the partners here to create the atlas, and at the end of the presentation we'll send you the link so you can check it. This is an example of the analysis that you can do for the municipality of Camaçaí, where CAF had worked in Brazil to show what are the performances of these municipality with the averages compared to the averages of Brazil, but not just this, but also sanitation, education, work, and access to technology. Now presenting a first version of this atlas that is in the computer, but it's not available yet for mobile networks. So we're going to create the app in the next few weeks. The second challenge, the urban challenge. The concentration that happens usually in urban areas brings benefits, access to education, health, recreation, but it also has costs. The transit or public transportation takes longer, and when you manage this, the they especially track traffic jams and other problems involved are something that we have to solve. And this is going to continue being like this. One of the most urbanized areas in the world. The percentage of the urban areas in cities has been growing steadily, and it's going to get to 88% at the end of the century. A third challenge is to think how these closed solutions, they have to consider the outside world in order to face global challenges. Many of these challenges, there are two of these challenges, which are the ones on the left, which is the crisis of climate change and climate warming, the loss of biodiversity, and also the energy transition efforts that are in charge of the local governments to deal with the public transit, to build infrastructure of transport. So we're facing many things that have to do with the climate crisis. And another trend is the digital transformation and the impact of AI, something that is also going to be discussed about the opportunity of institutional improvements that have to do with this area. And Gustavo is going to talk about it. From now on, one is something that we want to talk about is this action areas that we have identified in the report to improve the governance of the territories. And these are the 5 ones that we identify as the main ones. So we're going to go through each one of them and go into further detail. The first one of these areas has to do with the fiscal world. An important number is to show that Latin America and the Caribbean, we see a high dependence between governments considering the local governments' revenues. What we can see here is next to 60% of the revenues that these governments have, the subnational governments, depend on transfer from the central government, which is a relatively high number than the one in the OECD. The transfers are important. They play an important role. They are one of the mechanisms to distribute this information. So we should not get rid of these transfers. But when there is too much dependence, there is an impasse between the people who collect the tax and the ones that spend. That might create a difficult situations. That's something that we have to correct. And there is the existence between the two different patterns in order to limit the fiscal autonomy of these governments. Very often, some of these governments do not have fiscal autonomy to know what import or taxes should be placed and should be charged. And there's also a very low level of access to financing and or lines of credits that might hurdle some projects that are important for the areas, because many of the governments make less than 30% of the investment in infrastructure. Within this context, the recommendation is on one side trying to to reduce the dependence, the level of dependence of the transfers, and to raise the capacity of collection, tax collection in these regions, and pay attention to the instruments that we use, because we can see that in some countries, they have some taxes that are not very efficient from the economic perspective. And in this case, a point that we highlighted on the book is the growing reform that is happening in Brazil, especially in a very complex reform that replaces the old system of tax collection to make it into a more efficient, that we see that it's very interesting, and we'll see it and how it's going to be implemented, because it talks about the transition to a more efficient system. In the book, we also insisted in strengthening the tax collection using property taxes, especially considering the ones that reflect the values of the land. And this is a very local tax, and especially in Latin America, there is a very little tax collection of this type of tax compared to the countries of OECD. There is another one which has to do, that depends on the transfer from the government, the central government. We did a very important work considering the schemes of government transfers. And something that we realize is that they're very cyclical and very discretionary. That is something negative in considering that it reduces the possibility of planning and its predictability for the budgets in these governments. And that's an area that we underscored. Another key point also within these Andean countries is especially the share of the benefits of royalties. In considering the mining operations, it's not done properly. So we have to be really careful and not to reduce the incentive, especially the mineral production that are important for the energy transition. And now there is also the regulations. And the point is we have to transition to a high level of balance in the subnational accounts. And here, naturally, the fiscal rules play a very important role in this region, considering these regulations. And the tax is the point is not trying to restrict it, but in reality to guarantee the reality of the accounts, and especially considering the bankruptcies of civil insolvency. Colombia has developed this regulation considering its previous experiences at the beginning of the 20th century. There were public reforms that happened with many different laws. And also really important is the topic of transparency and the harmonization of the fiscal information, because in reality, up to now, the subnational information is very unequal and sometimes it's not harmonized, right? And in the third, as I had previously said, it has to do with the planning and urban management. That is really important. As it was said, in an urban area, when you improve the area, the lives of the people, you improve the area of the city. At the beginning of the century here in Brazil, the Statute of the Cities gave the mandate to cities to develop directive master plans, and something that we realize very clearly in the percentage of the cities that effectively introduced these instruments is that it seems to be trivial, but we don't do this with any mandates or any other aspect, and that changes this planning part. It's very important that the planning and the management to generate value. A study that is very important that we highlighted in the book is the Transmillennium in Bogota, the bus system that is very used in the region, that is pioneered in Brazil, especially that was pioneered in Curitiba for public mobility. And there was a study that analyzed one case or another and showed that Transmilenio had increased the productivity for the city and for the people. So these profits could have been higher if the regulation of the properties was combined with the infrastructure of the system that was developed for Transmilenio. And that shows very clearly the idea that we mentioned about integrating the elements that have to do with the planning, considering the infrastructure, regulation of the land, and mobility, also regular activity, active mobility. And something that is very important also to incorporate ever more climate resilience elements and biodiversity also, and anything that has to do with planning. Third area, it has to do with the civil servants and local bureaucracy. The reality is that in decentralized countries, most civil servants at the subnational level, this is what they are at the subnational level. That's what we could see up to the 80s. But now there are many challenges to retain and to attract these civil servants in local areas or in specific areas. It's important to strengthen the mechanisms of people. It's a data that we observe, which represents the level that has to do with a more cyclical approach, and that has to do with the lower levels of government. This is the institutionality that has to do with it. There is also evidence that the payment is another important variable or aspect that we have to consider. We also have to recognize that local governments do not have the autonomy, whether legal or financial resources, to deal with payment policies. It's important to complement everything that has to do with recruitment, with special recruitment, programs to support capacity building for the workers and employees, and the schools have or play a very important role in this. And there is also a very important agenda that makes available programs for capacity building, all of the programs, all of the workers in this region that we mentioned in the book. Now, considering the bureaucracy, there is another one that we want to show, which is the representative aspect and the local governments that have to meet the demands of the local communities. Another important data is that the percentage of town halls that are led by women, meaning the number of town women or mayor women, which is around 15% at the time, and it's a glass half full or half empty, depending on your perspective, because we're still far from the end goal. We want also to look at it, and not just for the elected positions such as the mayor positions, but to have to consider also the gender and also ethnic considerations. And the data are very scarce, but there are still breach or gaps between genders and ethnic groups, considering the type of place or position that is considered in the management of the personnel. The topic of the personnel, especially in this area, considers that we are a very urban continent, but a continent of big cities. And according to the definition of the cities, and we have 53 cities with more than 1 million inhabitants in Latin America.
And often they're in 17 different jurisdictions, 17 municipalities, and around half of the population lives outside the main jurisdiction of the city, the headquarters of the city. This is not something specific to Latin America, but that the great cities are fragmented in a lot of municipalities because we have these urban phenomena like urban transportation, they don't respect these administrative borders. So, just to give you an example, we have Belo Horizonte, how the city, as you can see, we have 28 different municipalities and 5 million people. The zone in red is the city. So, in Latin America in general, there are few cases of autonomous metropolitan regions. Usually, if they have metropolitan authorities, sometimes they're collegiate bodies from different municipalities to be able to govern some of these metropolitan themes. However, oftentimes they have very little autonomy, especially financial autonomy. So they use a lot more of sectorial entities, which are dedicated to specific areas like metropolitan transportation. So we have intermunicipality consortiums in Brazil, exactly dedicated to tasks like this, like transportation in metropolitan areas there. And so we see the importance that the legal framework are very clear in relation to these types of cooperation that local governments can create inside their countries. And of course, these corporations aren't just in formal areas. Of course, we must also have more informal partnership networks like local government federations that exist both at a national level and in the international level. CAF also acts like this. We also push towards this agenda. Perhaps the most important case is the biodiversities network. So, for different criteria for biodiversity and climate resilience. And as our last area of action, we talked about digitalization. And we have 3 large blocks of tasks that governments do that can be leveraged in relation to digital tools. One has to do with internal processes, administrative processes, traditional public functions, different registries, how you update the different registries, that evidence that when you digitalize, you increase the capacity to raise taxes. And we also have financial administrative systems. And we also, all the areas related to services to citizens, for instance, managing licenses and permits, or the bureaucracy to access a vaccination campaign, for instance. And also we're talking about the whole world of territorial management, a little bit of a newer world of cities using cameras and sensors in the cities to create monitoring of security or of traffic. There's evidence that in each of these areas there is a positive effect on the capacity for management and delivery for citizen services. But we still need to universalize all of this, especially the levels of connectivity. And a way to visualize connectivity has to do with the differences that exist within a country for speed. So in Brazil, for instance, it's one with the best connected areas. They go from there's very different speeds. So we have infrastructure issues, data centers, cables, and something else that's important to add to all of this. We must have digital inclusion policies, because it's important to always take into account that there are segments of the population that have a harder time to access these kinds of services because of a lack of resources or because of age, which is also a variable that explains the use of this kind of tool as well. So we've already talked about the digital transformation, how important it is, but we always must keep a principle of having multi-channels to ensure that we have access to traditional means as well, analogical means, for the population to avoid exclusion errors with this kind of strategy. And so these are the 5 areas of action. And a final reflection that we've already talked a little bit about, but which is also important to wrap up, is that all of these initiatives that we've talked about demand a coordinated effort between different stakeholders. So the local and the regional governments are the protagonists. They do a lot of the institutional investments to develop these capacities, but we also have a very important role for the central governments. If we think briefly about a variety of the themes that we've talked about, we see that just one government won't change. A lot of these are systemic changes. So when we're talking about tax reforms and transfer areas, even in technology policies. So you must, for instance, fix standards. This is very important for the central government to do. So there's also a very important role for multilateral institutions such as CAF. So this book is maybe more. It's a way for us to show our commitment to this agenda that throughout the years we've been investing in different projects, and so we wanted to fill it with different kinds of information on CAF projects, on CAF impacts, on a lot of the different suggestions, a lot of different inventions of cities throughout the continent, and this has been manifested throughout technical cooperations and the associations that we've mentioned, with training programs and with knowledge products such as this report. With this, we'll leave you. We'd like to thank you. We will invite you to download the report, which is in this QR code. We also have the executive summary in a book form, and we have the regional local government atlas. It's in this website, atlasgobiernoslocales.caf.com. So it's made for computers, not for cell phones, but we'll also have an optimization. And we'll give it, we'll in the next few weeks and months, we'll give it more functions and also optimize it for cell phones soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Guillermo and Gustavo, for such an interesting presentation. Now we'll open the floor for the discussion panel on public policies. And we'll invite to the stage for the moderation of this panel Ms. Veronica Maranchi, Socioeconomic Research Director at CAF. We would also like to invite Nubia Carbonina Cordobas, the director of the Department of Choco, Ronald Zafasi, the director for international strategies for governments and social institutions at the Austral University, Miguel de Bajado from Tajacapa, Chile, and the vice mayor of Fortaleza, Ceará.
Bueno, muy buenos días.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this panel discussing public policies. The presentation of Red 2025 that we shared a few minutes ago gave us a general view on the subnational governments in the region, its attributions, its resources, its challenges, and recommendations for policies. This is an excellent motivator to continue reflecting in this line, in which we propose ourselves to do in this panel. And it's a great opportunity to have these great panelists. They are working every day from their subnational governments. So they are specialists in the workings of the subnational government. So our idea with this panel is to reach these concrete challenges through the examples in our territories. The organization of the panel, we have 2 rounds of questions, so 1 question for each of the panelists. And so we'd like to ask the answers to not exceed 5 minutes so that we'll have time to discuss these responses with everyone. So I'd like to cordially invite you. I'd like to thank you for sharing your time and for sharing your experiences. So the first question will be for Nubia Cordova from the Department of Choco. Choco is a territory that is very rich in mineral resources and biodiversity. With your experience in Choco and Colombia, what do you believe is the role of the regional government and local governments given the environmental crisis, which is one of the aspects that is highlighted in the report? First, I'd like to take the opportunity to greet all of you who are present and to thank CAFI and Banco do Brasil for the invitation for this important event, and also to thank the invitation from Choco. I'm going to go to Spanish because I don't want to push my luck. Thank you for the invitation. So the Department of Choco is certainly a department in which most people have a difficulty in actually locating the map. Where is it, first and foremost? It's a part of a biodiversity hotspot that's very important, geographically speaking. Probably many of you, especially since you're Brazil and we share the Amazon, all of us are located in Amazon as a hotspot for global biodiversity. But for the Choco department, it's the largest and most important region of the mega diversity on Earth, where they concentrate where's the largest concentration of biodiversity per square meter. The reason why at a certain point the world took awareness about the Amazon crisis exactly when we started to see the ruination of the exploitation of the territory and the resources and what this can imply to the world and for humanity in the long term, not just for us countries who share the Amazon and their territories. However, the reason that we're working on the loss of the geographic Choco is the Pacific coast between the Republic of Costa Rica and the Republic of Ecuador. The center is in Colombia in the Department of Choco, 47,000 square kilometers, so we're close to Panama. We're the only department in the American continent that has access to 2 different coasts, Caribbean and the Pacific. And the reason I insist because we're concerned about this geographical area as a biodiversity is the different communities that take care and protect this biodiversity. This biodiversity is protected by Afro-descendant populations, indigenous populations, and the Afro-descendants are the majority. And they've been protected because they've been incorporated into their means of survival and production or productivity as well, and their ways of life in the territory. So it's a little bit like how the local governments can manage or better understand the assets of the territory to be able to manage them. So this has to do with the obligatory need to leave the productivity scheme that's been imposed on us from a position that people from the outside tell us how to produce. It's not the same in all different territories. In some cases, territorial assets correspond to what we already know, for instance, industrialization. And we understand that more competitive industrial processes, above all, with more technologies, are equivalent to wealth and also equivalent to welfare. In theory, that's what we as local governors must do. These are demands from the citizens. We want better living conditions. We want more infrastructure. We also want better jobs. But that's not true for every territory. For some territories, The assets that we really have may be tradition, traditional knowledge, the possibility of monetizing this traditional knowledge, but also natural resources, not as exploitation for its own ends, but but in a sustainable way. This is a huge challenge for us because the immediacy of these short periods. In Colombia, we have 4 years without re-election, so you need to sort of base yourself on the traditional, ordinary way. So proposals that have to do with sustainability go beyond. They are long-term proposals. However, we do believe we not only have a challenge but also a privilege of managing this kind of situation or territory that has other assets. We must also project it for the goal of transforming things in the way we want to. These territorial transformations definitely impact our biodiversity. All right, thank you very much. That's very interesting that you highlight the traditional communities. Now, let's talk about another aspect. So, you've worked in international relationships of different national governments. And the question that we'd like to ask you is, in which areas of governance, subnational governance, do you see the main opportunities that may lead to actions, and which actions can subnational governments take to take advantage of these opportunities? Can you hear me? I'm very honored to participate. I'd like to ask the Vice President. It's very common in the narrative to listen from friends who say, I went to Madrid or I went to Medellin or Lima, putting in the identification of a region or a city above the superior political organization above it, like a country, for instance. More and more, the world identifies subnational entities, opportunities for development, and is finding solutions for global challenges.
The informs of CAF, they show, especially considering the climate change, they show us the cities that jointly are responsible for the emissions of the greenhouse gases. When we think about the attraction of talent as the main vector of development, immediately we are reminded of the quality of life of the territories where these talents are going to be located. We're speaking softly because the sound quality is a little not very good, so we're going to keep trying. And it's not a topic, an additional topic among other ones. It's an imperative of development. So it has to be part of the development mission in a territory and to be added to a supply chain value of global value. So everything that is happening now is going to impact, and it's much harder than before. And if I might say so, we have to deal with it because it's, as the president said, we have macro trends that, especially in the report, the one of the 20th anniversary, they show the framework for the development of these countries. So these international aspects have to gain space, especially in the equation of the development of the territories that have to propose to themselves, and the multilateral organizations as CAF have to propose also. Out of the three paintings that have, or the three areas with different colors with the attributions, there is also the international part that is necessary, because we cannot mistake that with the international trade, considering the places that are located in the countries. But these I'm sorry, the sound quality is really bad here. And it has described with very good attributes. What are the attributes of quality of life that each one of the territories are going to have in this place? Maybe the main aspect or manifestation of this trend is what has happened since the pandemic, which is the phenomenon of digital transformation. People that can, or digital nomads that can take their knowledge anywhere they want due to natural issues or quality issues. But I'm finalizing here. This is a vector of development that has to be part of the strategy. Thank you, Fernando. Now we're going to pass now to Rosamian, the governor of Tarapacan, about the local government creations of in the Chilean government is one of the most important processes that implies in the structural organization, considering everything that it means with the workers, with the communication with the citizens and the governments. So we want to have your perspective on how the creation of the process of this new level of government. Thank you very much. Firstly, for the invitation. CAF especially is very honored to be able to share their experiences from the north of Chile. And it takes some time to, I mean, it's hard to pronounce to locate Nubia's location, but it's hard to pronounce the name of my territory. Tarapacá is a region at the north of Chile, and nowadays in the 80s and the 90s, actually, they started with the local governments. Unfortunately, we had a late empowerment of the local authorities in Chile just after 2021. The citizens decided to be able to make a decision about this local government. I was the first democratically elected of the governors in Chile, and I was re-elected in my territory. Therefore, we have only one re-election of 4 years, and in the period of 8 years. What happened in Chile is that at the very beginning in the 90s, when this work, the subnational work started, there were very concrete 3 stages. The first one is the role of assigning some budget with very little budgets and with the subnational governments to have access to it. And the second stage, we make the decision in the states to launch the planning role, and that is possible, makes it possible to establish roadmaps according to the territory needs. And the third stage that we are living now in Chile, we have nowadays the possibility of strengthening these institutions and to be able to talk about the executions of plans and projects. What might be considered interesting in this process is that there is already a channel for participation by the citizens, and that was created by civil society. They are fundamental to make decisions considering the investments from the government, by the government. First, they have to reach consensus, and right after, with the transfer of competences, the ability of the attributions, where we can have a discussion of how the central states empowers the subnational governments, strengthening the territorial structure. And I'd like to highlight the last one, because in general, the politics are really good at doing this, talking about this. As subnational governments, we can go into deep in this process, and there is an important element. The social agenda is another agenda of the central government that enables us providing resources, And I would say that in the era of experience and the last year, it has enabled us to have a fundamental project that we had last week, a few weeks ago, with the president, which is the project integration. Why should we consider that? Why it's important to take it in consideration? It's a sub-territorial project of the subnational government. And this is with all of its characteristics, but it empowers me, and especially in the northern territory of Chile, Chiagro, which is a specific area. It's a project of almost 50 years, you can see. And this trajectory, it is a place for trade, international trade that they want to invest in it after 2022, in which the governors of Tarapacá and in the north of Chile, we talked to the Paraguayan governors and Argentinian governors, and that has emboldened the work. In reality, it is what it is, a project where there is significant commitment by the president from Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Chile. It is a project that is very exciting because we're permanently is holding international activities. And it gives us a sign that the subnational governments can have an agenda of integration with other subnational entities in order to generate employment, improve the quality of life in the region. The lessons learned of this, especially in the productive area, it has to do with the project that the transoceanic part, and I believe that Chile has a debt with their local governments. I'm not sure if you were studying about this, but in Chile we also have two cases of regional and local governments where the autonomies are different, the tutelage of the state, and now the agenda of governors in Chile enable us to do what the local governments do, which is a more flexible use of resources in order to get closer to the people and to have more agility in matters of urgency. So we're going slowly, sometimes a little bit faster, but it keeps helping the development of the region. Now we're going to Gabriela Pequeña Costa Gomes, the Vice Mayor of Fortaleza. The report highlights that the Brazilian cities have been key pioneers in urban aspects, especially considering transit and public mobility and planning. This tradition, from your experience in Fortaleza, what are the main challenges in management, urban management in the big cities, considering these aspects? Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I don't speak Spanish. I understand it well, but I don't speak it. First, I would like to thank CAFE, represented by the President Sergio, Bank of Brazil, for the opportunity to receive us here at the House of Bank of Brazil, Veronica for sharing her knowledge, and for representing Stephanie from representing CAFE here in Brazil. Considering inclusion, if you're watching us, I'm gonna self-describe for inclusion purposes. I have light eyes and light skin. I'm representing the Mayor Leitão. Fortaleza is the fourth largest capital in the country. We have around 2.6 million inhabitants in our capital. And considering the corner-based municipalities with the capital, we reach almost 5 million people. We have moved ahead considering the BRS and the BRT, the bus rapid transit, and the policies that are connected to buses and mobility, but still face main challenges in mobility in the outskirt regions of the cities. Considering these 2.6 million inhabitants that we have in Fortaleza, we have 1.2 million under the threshold of poverty. And for you, this, so to understand, these are people who have per capita income that is lower than 280 reais a month. We are a city that needs to redistribute wealth. And to do that, we are only going to be able to achieve these goals with geo-referenced policies in the hubs of poverty in our cities. There is a line, there is a separation between many classes in Fortaleza, and like a veil. And in order to achieve the goal of ending poverty, we need to tear down or tear up this veil. And in order to achieve this, we need partners such as CAF and people that are following the goals of Agenda 2030, following ESG, so that we can work with evidence-based public policies. Such report empowers us to work along with CAF to work on different projects to fight inequalities. And doing that means to bring in mobility, teaching, and geo-referenced public policies also. We are in the new term of Fortaleza. We've been there for only the 5 months, and we are talking to CAF so that pretty soon we'll be able to have public policies that are geo-referenced and that will transfer income and help in the redistribute and fight inequality in Fortaleza. Thank you for that. Now, Nuia, with the second question. At the end of June this year, CAF will take part in the 4th Conference of Development in Seville, in order to achieve the SDGs of development. What are the main challenges that you are identifying in Colombia in order to fund initiative to reduce the social inequalities and gaps so that these sustainable development goals are achieved? Funding, meaning the main challenges that we face, I'm not sure if my colleagues all here are governors. This might happen only in Colombia, maybe it happens everywhere in the region, but the type of resources that the cities and the municipalities receive in town halls, it's not the same one that we receive, the governors receive, or regions, taking into account that some have to deal with subnational administrations that are more concrete, which is to plan in this region. Something that we have to remember is this relationship that the governor says about the possibility of having a relationship coming from international funding, from banks, for concrete initiatives that have to do with subnational governments, because the problem is the possibility of the execution of public policies that want to achieve the SDGs. Considering the SDGs from the perspective of a nation, they basically become indicators, and the possibility of to know whether these indicators are good or bad, it depends on the type of state that we have. If it's a central state, we suppose that it has the complete responsibility to say that within their territory they have the budget in order to achieve these goals. If it's a federated state or federative state, the responsibilities are delegated to the subnational entities. The point is the access to tools or for funding to achieve these goals. We're very used to think about the SDGs as they're mentioned in a very graphic manner, in like little boxes or little squares. Basically, like expectations, goals. No, we're talking about things that the subnational levels of governments and cities have to deal with face on a daily basis. Employment, access to drinking water, reducing inequalities, environmental sustainability. They're all challenges that are concrete in the execution of these goals. I say this because in the department or the state of Choco, we have indicators that are very serious. That in that represent, for example, 67% of poverty, 35% of youth unemployment, the highest mortality rate or baby mortality rate under 5 years old. These are indicators that first are not islands. Probably the economic opportunities nowadays have to do with other 5 SDGs that are connected to sustainability and opportunities of industrializations that are different. Water is probably related to the mortality rate of women and children and the connection of employment schemes of works that tries to achieve these goals. They require the ability of have the funding and to create our own administrative strategies, our implementation strategies, and all of it requires money. It's not just goodwill by saying I'm achieving this, and but just in Bogota and Barranquilla and other cities, the four or three biggest cities that have more revenues in order to achieve the overcoming inequality. So that is key. They are not similar. The resources and funding or revenues actually, because these revenues are not connected directly to effectively to citizenship. So it's very important to say that this need, because it's not really a target, the need that the subnational entities have to implement administrative activities that guarantee to change these territories in order to achieve the SDGs, considering the differences in the budgets and differences and administrative policies. The point is that resources and the sources of funding, they are more important. And sometimes in SDGs, we're thinking about the nation state, and therefore we can move forward and faster in this aspect.
Very well. So a second question to Fernando. The report basically is about the public sector, but a lot of the functions that are developed in the subnational level are executed with private institutions, for instance, infrastructure concessions, or in sanitation or waste collection. So we want to talk about what is, in your opinion, what are the challenges that subnational governments have in this interaction with the private sector? Thank you. Well, for a definition of the subnational level, there are a lot of different realities in the region and different levels of government to reach different policies. We have very little municipalities as well as very large regions. So, as far as the basic services, I think that's the first place for public-private articulation, and this has advanced a lot in terms of concessions and public-private partnerships and different modes of co-management between public and private sector. But actually, we are in agreement that the private sector will be a protagonist in the development agenda of subnational entities. But the largest challenge we have is to agree in a vision to do this, to mobilize the private sector locally in attracting the global private sector to a given region. In second place, there is what yesterday's the last year's COF report said, which is a report on what public assets these development agenda demands and what this demands in the general or subnational levels. This is it an electric power line? Is it a training space? So having a fiscal agreement, which is often mentioned as far as challenge for subnational entities, not just because of the fact that fiscal and financial management to manage these public assets. This is a big challenge with the private sector as well. What I mean is that coffee for a long time now, because out of multilaterals, they're the ones who are going straight to the agenda. They're recognizing that subnational governments are entities with rights and that can take their own credit and that should have their own development strategies. In third place, I'd like to say that there are many activities with global challenges. Now we have, for instance, different subnational level government organizations that require social licenses, and this doesn't come from a national government. That for this social permit, you have them at a local government level, and you're working with the populations and teaching the populations regarding the benefits, intergenerational benefits that these permits will give in relation to this activity. In fourth place, connected to this third place, the subnational governments and in their relationship with the private sector, they have a large challenge of rebalancing the benefits of these different economic activities. So, for instance, I know that CAFE's work with the province of Alcan, at the Vaca Muertas project, one of the demands that this government has with coffee and the private sector working with energy sectors, how can we develop the northern region, which is the least favored region in this country, not favored by. So national governments have this responsibility of redistributing welfare benefits, not only for the current generation, but those people who will live in that province or city or territory when this activity ends, if it's a mineral exploitation. Thank you very much. Now we'll ask so historically, Tarapacas is very rich historically in copper and now in solar power as well. So how do you work with regional governments to empower leverage the energy transitions, and what are the challenges to crystallize this leveraging? Well, I believe that something that we'd like to highlight, that we are a zone with a lot of natural resources and we have the possibility of developing lithium exploitation is also first and foremost in relation to public and private relationships, that we need to establish directives for the development of the region. And I can give this suggestion in our region is that we shouldn't just have regional development, but we should also have climate action plans that should be integrated in metropolitan areas, that are integrated to territorial challenges. We'll also have different agendas from the planning side. I would say, my dear friend Juliano asked this, but maybe my region might be the most planned region in Chile. There's a central element which did not allow us to advance in a very important field, which had to do with private resources. This would also allow our region, which has a lot of minerals, including copper, lithium, nitrate as well. Usually we feel that minerals should subsidy territorial needs, and when we talk to them, and said that this was not a field in which we'd like to develop our activities, but rather to accelerate the investment from the state, because we have no problem as far as mineral resources. The problem in the state is that we don't have projects, because particularly for us, the evaluation of these projects have certain complexities, and oftentimes in extreme territories we don't have human capital. So as Nubi was saying, sometimes we need some sanitation solutions, and this is very complex. This can take 8-10 years, and this is not a big problem for creating projects in human habitat. Currently, I must say, in relation to public-private relationships, we have around $6 million executing a variety of different companies. Particularly, 3 of them have an important presence of copper in Chile, and we have a robust plan to strengthen public-private partnerships. So we're also looking into why do we accelerate this? Because we invited private stakeholders to help us, not with infrastructure investment, but rather smaller human capital investments, which we were able to invest in our region. Second, that we should accelerate the investment portfolio. And so the per capita investment in our investment will lead to us reaching the highest capital per capita, because we'll have a lot of investment projects from the state, and many other subnational entities can't develop this. So it's like a big challenge. It doesn't have a lot to do with me, because we have these administrative norms. Because oftentimes in the territories, this takes a lot of different bureaucracy and documentation, and it ends up delaying investments. And the big problem we have is that the citizens then start to get disappointed with central governments. And I'd like to wrap up my intervention highlighting that the decentralization in Chile helps democracy, because effectively in today's world in which we have high levels of violence and the legitimacy of the territorial institutions is not being recognized by the citizens, if there is a word, it's nearness. When the citizens meet their authorities, they know who they are, they feel that they are near, like mayors, and this could be in Argentina or anywhere else. When an authority meets citizens and they can explain to the citizens why is it hard to solve this or that problem, then you have a better reception of this institution. In Chile, I don't know if this same thing happens in other countries, but the most legitimized solution are our parliament, the Chamber of Deputies, and the Senate in Chile. They are in the central region, but in the regions, the subnational governments are more important, the regional and local governments. So this tells us something. And at the very least, you have empathy, and with empathy, you can create trust, and then we can work. When we feel far, the people get far from democracy, because they're far from institutionality, and they open to other models which are more violent. We in northern Chile, the organized crime is very strong. So we're trying to exercise democracy in empathy, recognition, the legitimacy of the territory. So I believe they'll have a good project for development that is being guaranteed. And when we don't have any sort of losses with the private sector, so we're not doing this in an improvisational manner. We're not doing this from one day to the other. So they need. We have agreements with the private sector where they need to invest resources in infrastructure so that we can develop our infrastructure together with these mining or other private projects. In the last 5 years, we've even gone to diplomacy. For instance, in our region, we're closer to Bolivia. So we have an important presence of the Bolivian community in our business with international commerce. 60% of the exports that go to Bolivia come through our port, through our free zone. So we're very close to Bolivia, and they're a lot we're a lot closer than many national governments are to Bolivia. So for diplomacy, we can strengthen our intercultural exchange. So we can have this for the whole region, from Iquique to Sao Paulo to the whole region. So why doesn't it allow us to do this to have diplomacy for air connections, for instance? So maybe in a future report we can also look at this kind of challenge. Thank you very much. Now the last question in the panel for Gabriela. Once again, Gabriela, how do you evaluate the situation as far as Brazilian access to investment, especially in particular the municipality of Fortaleza? You have a project with coffee, so how can you leverage these multilaterals? Fortaleza has a long history with coffee. It started in 2012, and I would say that some of the structural projects for the city of Fortaleza happened thanks to this partnership. The organization of the project, the executive monitoring of the implementation of the project, the care with the delivery. I made the transformations that I would say are the most structural for the city, be it from the sanitation point of view, through one of our operations, Fortaleza was able to reach around 68% of sanitation. So we still have a long way to go, with around 32% of homes without sanitation, but this is a big legacy of the 68%. Another legacy that we can mention as far as this partnership was the legacy of urban transportation and mobility. Fortaleza has advanced in the different modes of transportation. Currently, it's a city in Latin America with the largest bicycle way. We have around 550 kilometers of bicycle paths. We have the BRS and the BRT that are very well organized, and we are working on the integration of the different modals because this is still a city that is preferential for cars. So this is something that we're working on as well, but this is a partnership that there's an upcoming partnership that will work with the integration of different modals of transportation. We also have a successful partnership in tourism with coffee. That's where it all started, actually, in 2012. Our first partnership, which was the Beira-Mar de Todos project, the Seaside for Everyone project, which was implemented in a very important manner for the city. Currently, Fortaleza is one of the cities in the northeast of Brazil that receives the most tourists. And recently, I was talking to President Sergio that it's, in my opinion, the most beautiful city in Brazil. So I'd like to thank Coffee for that as well. And I believe that the biggest legacy is bringing professionalism to the project, of actually having a very well done project, a that fits very well with the priorities of the administration. So for those of you who don't know Fortaleza, you have an invitation. You can go to Fortaleza and see the concrete fruit, the concrete gains that we have from this coffee partnership, and we hope for many upcoming projects so that we can change the largest difficulty in Fortaleza, which is social inequality. Thank you very much. So if you have any questions, otherwise we'll finish the panel. I don't know if you have any specific questions. If not, I'd like to thank you for your participation, and I'd like to ask you for a round of applause to our panelists. I'd like to thank you all for your participation in the panel. Let's take a picture. We're about to finish this event, and we'd like to invite to the stage Viviane Vec, the Secretary of International Matters and Interim Development in the Ministry of Planning and Management in Brazil. Good afternoon, everyone. Or actually, no one had lunch. No one's had lunch, so let's say good morning. So just to wrap up this fruitful event for the launching of CAFE's report, I'd like to make certain considerations on what we at the federal government level are doing to expand and to better harvest the fruit as far as external funding. And Brazil is one of the only countries in the world that has in the central government a external financing commission that analyzes and approves any sort of loan from subnational levels. So when Minister Simone Tebet, under the leadership of President Lula, took the term in 2023, we made three main reforms in COFIEX in this council. One, a governance reform, bringing foreseeability and transparency to this process. One reform that had to do with technology, so we changed and reformulated the whole system for receiving external finance requests. And finally, and more impactfully, the technical reform. And this technical reform has to do with a change and training of our whole technical core at the Ministry of Planning to support all subnational entities in relation to the analysis of external financing requests, and also a change in the norms to bring in clear criteria and objectives so that these requests, when the subnational entities are taking external financing, it's clear why it is that they're actually taking this investment and what are the benefits. Like the Vice Mayor Fortaleza mentioned, what is the real benefits, the real impact of this international financing on the lives of citizens? So finally, what is our role as the federal government given the external financing policy? So we want to strengthen the technical capacities of states and municipalities so that through development banks, and I'd really like to thank CAFE and our partnership. And this year we're going to have the second training course for managers in external financing. Last year we created a course in which CAFE, together with the Alzidas Institute and NAPI and the Ministry of Planning, we designed together an objective of bringing to the different mayor's offices that are led by women and by state governors. We have 2 female state governors in Brazil, so that they have the strength and the technical capacity to make external loans, to understand what they're good for, what are the problems, because only subnational entities really understand what are the real needs and problems of those areas. And the federal government is here to help the development banks to find the subnational governments and the subnational governments to find the external financing policy. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Viviane. And finally, we ask to the stage Mr. Christian Sinelli, Corporate President of CAFI, Strategic Administration of CAFI. Thank you so much to all who took part in this activity. Thank you, Vivian. Vivian is the representative along with the board, so it's important to have her here with us. And I'd like to congratulate the team who took part of this event. It is a very important effort that happened throughout the time. And in very few minutes, you could see here, but actually it takes a long time to work and to get here. Thanks. I would like to thank the journalists that have been following us, so everything here could be done, especially to see the daily routine of our countries. There are 23 countries that are part of this institution, and God willing, 24, 25 at the end of the year. I'd like to thank also the Bank of Brazil, the Vice President, and the President also, that enabled us to be here at this amazing place here. To all of us that are following us, such a relevant event. And as the Executive President said, it has to be considered within a global plan strategy, because these reports are planned with 2 years of advance. And as Sergio mentioned, he was already thinking about 2023. We have made some changes because our board asked us to change some things because we're the Bank of Latin America and Caribbean. And in October 1st, we visited Papa Francis also, and there was some other works that we did along with him, and he welcomed us many times for many different projects. And we're really moved the way he spoke about his voice that he had, considering how to treat the environment, not just with these encyclicals, but also his role that he played as a pontiff, as a pope, the first Latin American pope that we had ever in this over 2,000 years of history of the church. And Sergio mentioned that we had a triad of projects for the report. They are connected to many different things that were mentioned today, and this involved an institutional effort that for over 20 years we've been working with, so we could work with many different topics. And Sergio also always says, when he was a minister, he was the Minister of Trade, we published a topic of trade, about the topics of trade. And especially considering what we wanted to do in this report all of these years. As I used to say, that there were 20 years of work, but also there were some other efforts involved. Sergio also talked about the closed solutions or local solutions we presented here in Brasilia. In 2023, the environment topic that was presented and the climate change was presented in Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in Arauca community, because we understood that there was a very close relationship between the environment, the original communities, everything that had to do with biodiversity. We could present with Nubia if she were the governor back then. In Chocó, we could present it there. In any one of the areas where the topic of biodiversity is so relevant and present, especially the fair energy transition. As we mentioned yesterday with the journalist that read this report, due to the region that our countries have in this region. For example, the energy transition that we need to do to have that happens, such as Argentina in a province, and also the fiscal matters also. And in Tarapacá also with Jose Miquel. We also presented it in Atacama, especially because it was very relevant to have this, to deal with this matter of solar energy in Chile. And when we presented in Brasilia, it's not necessary to have so many explanations about the qualifications, but we could have presented it in Fortaleza as well, where Gabriela has work in the year 2012, since the year 2012, to help change the city. And as you have seen here in the previous panel, it's not a coincidence that one of the speakers, they were connected one way or another to the topics, and they finalized with a cross-section presentation with the topic of internationalization of cities, because the executive president of CAF said part of our work is to help take the voice of Latin America and Caribbean to other places. And these types of actions definitely helps internationalize cities and follow the different governments here in Brazil, especially considering COP that is going to happen in Belém, or also the summit of G20 that happened here in Brazil also, or the topic of mayor women, especially because we have a gender policy of inclusion. It's very important to do that in a country like this, and that makes it visible, a topic that was very clear, considering the glass half full or half empty. We haven't reached the parity between gender yet, and here in Brazil, we're trying to follow the example that we're trying to replicate in other countries. In this two-track place or roadmap, we're also trying to generate knowledge and do other things in order to achieve the SDGs that we want to achieve. Sergio also mentioned on December of 2021, when we started, he said that the topic of the cities was very important. That's why I created this space of biodiversity with over 200 cities that are part of this network that work to try and improve the quality of life around their cities, considering in Mata, Cusco, Asunción, Ushuaia, Córdoba, and many different meetings that happened and help actually the mayors to have a space of dialogue, a space to talk, and many different projects were created in these spaces that happened, such as in Ecuador and other countries as well. In order also to finalize, I'd like to talk about Pope Francis as a tribute to him, to follow his legacy. He always received us, and we did activities with him as well. And he was really connected to local governments, up to a point that a meeting that we had was with all of the with the mayors of Latin America and Caribbean. So you can see the importance that he gave to this topic, and not just to climate change. And to continue with his legacy, we're going to continue working with the topic of cities, environment, climate change, diversity, because we believe that this is a way, so as a development bank, to contribute with knowledge, with establishing networks, so these networks can help have qualitative improvement and dealing with good things and also to avoid things that are not so good. Also, thanks everyone that is present here and everyone that is watching us online watching this launch that we're gonna do everywhere in all the countries, but in an internal meeting that we had. The topic of cities we have to present in many other cities, not just one. So thank you very much to everyone here. Thank you, Mr. Asinetti, for your words. On behalf of CAF, the Bank of Development and the Economy of Latin America and Caribbean, we thank everyone here. We'd like to thank the Bank of Brazil. And if you'd like to see any of the sessions or if you've missed out on any of the recordings, you can check these recordings on the caf.com webpage. Thank everyone. I thank you for everything. Good afternoon.